history, we have this book from Puffin Lives by Guru Nanak, who's an enlightened master. Srilata Menon has given us this book. Is a small part of it. India in the 15th century was not very different from the India of the 21st century as far as conflict and hostilities were concerned. There is strife and war everywhere, just as there is even today. Again, like today, it was also a period of social unrest and religious disharmony. And life for the people in Punjab was particularly tough. Rulers came and went. While they brought oppression and repression with them, when they came, they went leaving behind death and destruction. Starting with Qutbuddin in Aibak's slave dynasty, India was ruled by a succession of dynasties right from the 12th century. The slave dynasty was in turn followed by the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, the Saids, and finally the Lodhis of the Delhi Sultanate. The Sultanate controlled most of India from Bengal in the east to the Deccan in the south. Till the Lodhis were overthrown by Babur, who established the Mughal Empire. This period saw a lot of instability and insurgency, with some small periods of peace in between, depending on the personality of the ruler. Conditions were not only hard and unhappy for all Hindus, but strange as it may seem, it was no better for the Muslims as well, especially the poor. Power was concentrated at the hands of the invaders, almost all of whom were Sunni Muslims and generally Afghans. There wasn't much love lost between the rulers and the ruled, as they generally tended to look down upon the local people. They were not only cruel and unkind but were religious fanatics as well. Though in comparison to his predecessors, he was considerably less harsh and much kinder. Sikandar Lodi 1488 to 1518, who ruled Delhi, was a zealous bigot, intolerant of other religions, and he levied the much hated Zigya tax on all of the non-Muslims. Even without the Zigya, life for the Hindus under these rulers was a very miserable and also a pitiful affair. So, religious persecution too was almost a daily affair. In fact, the Hindus themselves were a lot to blame for their miserable condition. They made their own situation considerably worse by following what was a very rigid caste system that not only aggravated their misery, but it also created its own set of problems. They also treated their women shamefully. But it must also be said that the Hindus were not solely to blame for this. There were historical reasons too. Although their fate was worse than slaves and they were forced to follow practices that were quite inhuman, it was also an unfortunate fallout of the various Muslim invasions that kept occurring. Women had to be protected from these marauding raiders, and so gradually their freedom got restricted. Then the influence of Muslim invaders, negative attitude towards women percolated down to the masses, who gradually began to see women as inferior. In a nutshell, the condition of women during the Middle Ages in India was dismal. Widows were treated like outcasts, and selfish Brahmins of the priestly class dictated all social practices. Female infanticide or killing of infants was prevalent. Child marriages were widespread. Since religion was all important, the priests and the clergy became powerful even among the Muslims. This meant, in simple terms, that if you needed to please God, you needed to use their services for rituals and ceremonies. So, the Brahmin priests and the mullahs were the ones who got to decide if rituals and ceremonies were required. More rituals and ceremonies meant more money in their pockets. Many amongst them were not only greedy and selfish, but also good at fooling the innocent into believing that they could reach God only through them. Apart from them, there were sadhus, yogis, and sannyasis who roamed the countryside, conning the gullible with black magic and superstition. It is in this environment where society was segregated along lines of religion, caste, and creed that young Guru Nanak had grown up. It was a society that thrived on religious hate and divisive inequality, a society that lived in great disharmony. Yet such was Nanak's popularity that despite their own tribulations, the question uppermost on everyone's mind when he went missing and then reappeared was where and why he had disappeared. Zigya. We come to the Zigya. This was a tax that was imposed in all of the Muslim countries on those who were not prepared to embrace Islam but wanted to practice their own religion. It guaranteed them the state's protection in case of an attack by the invaders. It was paid by all Jews and Christians in lieu of military service. It was levied on the Hindus for the first time in India around the 11th century CE when Muslims began their foray into the country. It was hugely hated. It was regarded as a forced weapon of conversion. It was a mark of humiliation by a population already overburdened by other Muslim atrocities. It was prevalent as late as the 20th century in Morocco and in Turkey and other Muslim countries like Algeria and Tunisia till recently. We come to how it was the Punjab before the Lodhis. The Punjab of the 15th century consisted of the Greater Punjab that included large areas of West Pakistan and Northwest India. Rich and fertile due to its 5 rivers and its proximity to Afghanistan and Balochistan, it attracted constant invasions west of its borders. Much before these invasions, it was home to the Indus Valley civilization and the Aryans, as well as the Persians, the Greeks, and the White Huns. The White Huns were followed by the Arabs. The slave dynasty set the ball rolling for the Muslim occupation of India and the rule of the Lodhis. We come to another interesting chapter here, a mystical experience. So the question uppermost on everyone's mind was, where had Nanak been those days, those 3 days? Nobody really knows. Historical facts are few and anecdotal narratives are many with regard to Guru Nanak's life. What we know about his life and times is from Nanak's own writings and the poems which have been set to music and the anecdotal biographies called Janam Sakhis by later gurus. But they don't contain many personal details. While there is some confusion regarding what really happened when he disappeared, there is hardly any doubt about the fact that it did happen. Some accounts speak about his disappearance into a forest nearby, while others say that when he dived into the river, he was led into the kingdom of God where he had some kind of mystical experience. Legend has it that God Himself appeared and spoke to him, and thus enlightened, he came back to spread the word of God. How much of this is actual fact? How much is embellishment? We have no idea. But suffice to say that all accounts are unanimous in the belief that he did disappear for 3 days near the river, and when he appeared, he was a different man, an enlightened one. He himself has said in verse that he had received divine instructions to go out among the people and them teach them the path of love and tolerance, of honesty, truthfulness, of service and mercy, and that there is only one God. These verses form the first stanza of what is now known as the Japji in the Guru Granth Sahib, which is a holy book of the Sikhs. It is a known fact that Nanak, even as a boy, was far ahead of his times in his thinking. The prevailing political conditions around him, along with the misery brought on by blind faith and meaningless rituals, probably set him thinking about ways and means of breaking free and changing people's way of thinking. Whenever there are harsh, unequal living conditions or sustained persecution of any kind, this is happening all over the world, even today, people begin to question and rebel. History also tells us that whenever this is combined with political peace or weak governance, there is also a surge in the freedom of thought and expression within the country. Poets and thinkers pop up unafraid to express their views. Saints and religious leaders are born prepared to lead from the front. When that happens, there is a revolution of sorts, particularly if the anger is against the ruling power. Why do you suppose the French in 1789 and the American 1783 revolutions took place and the Russian Revolution in 1917? The French, the Russians wanted to overthrow their ineffective and selfish monarchies, while the Americans sought liberty from their equally selfish mother country, which was Britain. So, if the anger is against the strange hold of religion, then it gives rise to the demand for a reformation of the church, like it did in Germany in 1517. So it was during the Lodi rule. Amidst all of the religious instability, it also witnessed what was a semblance of political calm for a while. This allowed people to think and question existing norms, which in turn gave rise to new ideas. Similarly, though not on scales as large as those of the revolutions around the world, but in a more modest and definitely non violent way, people in medieval India started to feel rebellious and hostile towards a kind of religion that was propagated by the priestly class. It created among them a school of thinkers and non believers who were not scared to rebel. They began to question the authority of the Brahmins, the ulemas, the qazis also. This gave momentum to what is a Sufi movement among the Muslims in the north and the Bhakti movement, which is among the Hindus across the country. People like Baba Farhid, Kabir, many others began influencing people into breaking away from the clutches of God men and superstition. They began denouncing rituals and ceremonies and also decrying the caste system. They also began promoting what was a direct personal link to a single God. They sang about a God who loved and did not punish, a God who did not need the intervention of Brahmins or ulemas to bless the faithful, a God before whom all were equal, and a God who did not have to be feared. What they were doing was actually effecting what is a revolution, a kind of reformation in the way society thought of God. So it happened the young Guru Nanak began to preach and convert to blaze what was a new trail, as foretold by Pandit Hadyal, the village astrologer, way back in 1469 when he had been called upon to cast a little boy's horoscope. Next, we move on to what is the Sufi and the Bhakti movements. Both existed in India. Before Sikhism, they are generally considered to be very similar. Sufism is an offshoot of Islam. It emphasizes the importance of one God, the need to remember Him constantly through personal interactions and expressions of love while searching for truth. There were four important orders of Sufis in India during the 15th century. Namely, after the Sufi leaders, they were the Shistis, the Qadiris, the Suhrawardis, and the Naqshbandis. They had no uniform doctrine, nor were they a defined sect. Their beliefs were purely based on the Quran and the Hadith, which revolved around the life and practices of the Prophet. They believed singing and dancing was one definite way of getting to God. They advocated tolerance, piety also, and believed in the equality of all men. The Bhakti movement, too, though rooted in Hinduism, spread the belief that there was only one God and that a more direct personal link to Him could be achieved without middlemen and by singing devotional songs in praise of him. They too denounced what is a caste system, the blind ritualism, also that was prevalent. Ramanujan in the south, Ramanand in the north were the main propounders of this underlying philosophy of this movement, while men like Kabir, a Muslim weaver, Ravidas, a cobbler, tried to forge what was a common bond with God through songs and spiritual verses in praise of a single God. While the Sufi traditions of the movement still linger on in many countries, including India, the Bhakti movement appears to have gradually petered out. See you again tomorrow. We will meet sometime, maybe Monday. Till then, goodbye.